So, knowing how far you've come into, mastery of that, when we talk about Odu, because I definitely consider that. Man, I know you a humble guy, but you really have a mastery, brother. You really
Thank you.
do. So, how did you get started on your journey? Take us back to the beginning when Baba Joseph Ifa, before it was technically Baba Joseph Ifa. How did that journey look in the beginning?
Well, I mean, I was born in Miami, right? So I was specifically born in Opalaka, near 151st and 27th Avenue, which is known as Unity. And then from there, we lived in Hialeah. My neighborhood was known as Lago Grande. It's near Palmetto Hospital. And we lived there for the first 5 years of my life. And, it's just a cultural thing. I mean, it's like you can't walk anywhere in Miami without seeing some version of Ifa or Orisha expressed. That's why I sincerely believe it's kind of like the mecca of Ifa and Orisha practice in this country, in
Hmm.
my opinion,
Yeah.
originally, So from there, experiences with the culture. I remember the first time I really knew we were into something different was when they were doing an offering to a Caridad de Cobre, which is an Our Lady of Charity. They had a pumpkin, some honey, some sprinkles, a couple yellow candles, and I was very interested in that. And I asked what it was, and my aunt was like, "Don't ask questions, just learn." And I was like, "Okay." So I knew we were into something really different because I didn't see that happening in church. You know what I'm saying? When we would go to like El Rincon de San Lázaro on Fourth, and we weren't a conventional Catholic, Christian family because we were doing odd things in the evening.
Hmm.
So at that point, my interest started peaking, and even when we moved here to Orlando, we would always kind of go back and forth to Miami, visit, stay some time, etc. And I would just be exposed more and more to the culture. But ultimately, when I really took my first solid steps was around the time I was 16 or 17. I think I had my first job, that was actually paying money that mattered. And, I decided to move forward with a gentleman to be able to receive my warriors, which I did. And from there, it was kind of a whirlwind. I actually met him through my mother, who was working at a resort at the time. There was a gentleman that was a coworker that connected me to him. And it was ultimately through that gentleman, even though, at that point, we kind of distanced due to the fact that he moved and whatnot. I was able to get the recommendation from the same God brother to be able to meet my godfather, who ended up giving me the hand of Ifa and ultimately doing Ifa to me. So
Right.
it's a story that spanned, over a lifetime ultimately, because, when you're younger, you experience and delve into different things, you're finding yourself. But regardless of whether I was trying to, I don't know, play football or rap or I don't know, whatever it was that, goes through a teenage mind,
Right.
Ifa was always there. So, it was
Mm.
something that I always had a focus on, like, hey, if nothing else works out, it was actually my backup plan, to be honest with you. Even though it was really the plan, I didn't realize that as a young adolescent
Right.
man. So that's kind of like the background per se.
So, as we go through these things, those of us who come in to the practice, we often see signs that maybe at the time we didn't realize was that. And a lot of times these are, certain Orishas that may be speaking through our Odu, maybe your head Orisha, things like that. What was like the first Orisha that you realize now was that? What was like the first Orisha that kind of came to you along your journey?
Wow. Yeah, I'll never forget. I had an aunt. I have an aunt that's initiated in Yemaya for like 40 years. She did Orisha in New York back then, in like the heyday of when the Cuban people were coming over, and there was a real cultural like renaissance going on up there.
Mm,
But I'll never forget. We went to visit Miami one time, and said aunt took me to a woman's house. And this woman now I realized was a priestess of Shango, and she lived in a neighborhood known as Alapata, right, which is very like entrenched in this, and there's a lot of culture there, and a lot of it's very urban. So when we went into the room where they had their orishas and things like this, I think I was like maybe 8, something like that. That's how much this has
mm,
stuck with me. And she had this beautiful Santa Barbara, like that was just like 4 or 5 feet tall, and she had like these beautiful red cloths around the room, and the batea of Shango was there, and I don't know why, but I just knelt. The odd things that
mm,
kids do, like even me as a child at that point, I felt like this reverence, and I was like, I should probably kneel right now. And I'll never
Mm,
forget, the lady even said it, and I get chills thinking about it now. She said, um, this boy is meant for something. Because, it's not behavior that you really see from children, especially if we aren't blessed enough to be born into a Yoruba household, or really a household where, Orisha is super present. Even within my home,
mm,
no one was, had Orisha done or anything like that. So I'll never forget, Shango was that first real experience for me. And then apart from that, the experience I had with the pumpkin offering and whatnot. But it's interesting because when I read my sign for the first time, it was pretty emotional because Shango was Irete Suga's first steps into Ifa. So when Irete
mm.
Suga was adopted by Odudua as a slave child, he basically raised him together with his other son Shango, who was known as Oramiyang at the moment. And they basically trained him in Ifa, initiated him into Ifa, where he ended up becoming the Onife, which is the
Oh,
spiritual king
wow.
of the Yoruba people. That position was born in the Odu of Esekangola within our literature. And it was Shango who really gave him the position because when Odudua became older and, his sight was suffering, and Shango was tired of being a priest and a prince, he wanted to go conquer Oyo with what would become Oyo. He left his most trusted adopted brother with the care of their father and said, when the old man passes, the crown is yours, and I'll make sure that no matter what, everyone will take an oath to never invade Ife. That's why till this day, the kings of Ife, when they get initiated or inducted, they have to swear to never revolt against their spiritual capital.
Mm.
So that was my first real experience. Shango was really, he was there from the beginning. And my
Yeah.
mother has crowned Shango, and my grandmother was a daughter of Shango before she passed. Yeah.
Wow. So, it's amazing to like look at the interactions between spirits and children, you know, because I
Mm.
look at my own son, like when he was old enough to walk, right before 1 years old, he was already, you could already see the interaction. And it's like, the connection when you foster it between children and spirits, it becomes uncanny as they continue to grow, and by the time my son was 2 years old and I'm working in the daytime in the cemetery, helping people overcome certain things or whatever, he frolicking through the graveyard. Now the graveyard got fences and everything, so it's like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
you
That's
know
daycare.
you know they care what they get in.
Word.
But that's just like the connection, when children have with spirits. So can you kind of speak to that? Like, for those who may not know, why is it that children, have this pure connection with like the other side or these spiritual entities?
Absolutely. Now, I've heard explanations from other brothers or older Baalaos that what happens is Ori is still developing and it's still open to a certain degree. I mean, when we look at the human cranium, it takes time for it to harden and shut because the head is still molding, as they're growing up. So spiritually, the same thing is occurring. So that link or that chain between heaven and the mind, or Ori, or Olodumare and Ori, is still very present. Now, one of two things can happen. Either we can coddle it and nurture it so that that link, even when Ori closes via, the skull, is still present, where they're able to exercise that spiritual muscle. Or there's other cases where it's completely dimmed, based on possibly a lack of knowledge of the family about spirituality or a complete resistance towards it. I think another thing is the innocence. When we look at spiritism or even concepts within Ifa, the innocence and purity of heart is what allows positive things such as certain spirits and energies to get close to you. So what we try to do is we can never lose that light of innocence that we had when we were youthful, regardless of all the horrible things that can happen in this world, which they do. So that's another reason for that huge connection. And Lodumare loved kids, and I think,
Mhm.
when we look at the formation of the personality happening within 6 to 7 years, and you look kind of at Ifa's, dictamination in the Odu of Osakuleya, that, we have to be patient when initiating children to allow Ori to kind of settle. I think it's a very crucial point, for the rest of our lives. I think, you look at said tyrant or despot, what happened in their youth that caused them to go down that path. I do believe
Mhm.
people can be born with a biological predisposition towards certain things, but I think ultimately the culture and, the nurturing that we give to that child is what's going to dictate how their life is going to
Mhm.
go. So I think that's why there's such a huge connection between children and spirituality, because they're so pure and those energies want to be around
Mhm.
things that are pure. So we have to nurture
Man.
that through knowledge.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because like something my abuela, always taught me, um, was basically, to remain childlike with the things that you do. And as me being an Omo Eshu, that's something that's inherently there.
Yeah,
The childlike nature. You never really grow up, right? But
yeah,
it's to me that imagination as well that comes with being childlike, because you think about it, when you're a child, anything is literally possible.
yeah.
It's not until you get into, like, by the time you get into high school, the world has killed your dreams for the most part. You know
It
what I'm saying?
can
Like, the world
definitely.
has, they have come and said, no, you can't do that because of this, and you can't do that because of this, and now they kind of box you in. But when your mind is still childlike, this is now when we get things like the Wright brothers and airplanes. Like, who thought of that? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah,
you can fly. Like, that's a childlike thing. Egg, you can fly.
yeah.
And this is very important for people listening to your practice. Remain childlike. Anything is possible. And the spirits will, they will receive that and respond to it.